Good afternoon, Seven Institutions. It's Thursday, April 6th. And first I want to thank my Vice Chair, Senator Harrison, for filling in yesterday. I heard you did a wonderful job. I was very glad to have my seat back. I heard there was a little bit of a ruckus going on. So thank you very much. So thank you for letting me back. Appreciate that. We have the pleasure of having the Agency of Transportation District, and we're talking about the District 8 facility. Jana Morris, Brad McAvoy, Todd Law, and Bradley Cooperberger. Cooperberger, right? Yep. And we want to talk about Section 17, line 190. And I guess I kind of want to have a little comment about that before. I know because of another committee that we're in transportation, we're talking about this a little bit as well. And if we weren't just talking about this specific garage, I probably wouldn't be as interested as what I am. But I think that if we are trying to do in this state to reduce carbon as much as what we say, this one facility, I think, is really the type of facility that we do want to relocate. When you are talking about almost 9 miles round trip or whatever it is, just to run trucks through town and all of that stuff, I guess I really kind of want to fight for this. And I really want to make sure that this facility gets going in a good way. If it was anywhere else in something that was just an upgrade, I think I'd probably talk about, well, maybe that's not the time. But I'm kind of committed towards trying to figure out how we can do this and looking for your guys' input to where we're at, how it is, what you need, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. So for the record, my name is Jana Morris. I'm the Division Director for Finance and Administration. And I'll be sharing the screen here so everyone can see the presentation. So we're talking about Section 17, line 190 in the capital bill. We've kind of dialed this in a little bit to give you a specific presentation around the District 8 maintenance facility. And what we're looking to do with the request has a little bit bigger picture to it. We're going to share with you the spending profile and the timeline associated with the replacement facility for the St. Albans garage, or the District 8 facility. And I brought with me today Todd Law, who's our Deputy Division Director for District Maintenance and Fleet, Brad McAvoy, who is our Facility Manager, and Bradley Kuchenberger, who is our Chief Financial Officer, to help answer any questions that are specific to the garage facilities, the District Maintenance and Fleet need, our facility perspective overall, and what some of our plans might be long-term, and help you understand how this fits into the greater plan for starting to implement our carbon reduction strategies across our network of facilities for the Agency of Transportation. So our District 8 spending profile, the request in the capital bill is for $3.5 million. That fits into fiscal year 24. So we have about $2.3 million in fiscal 23 appropriated towards the spending profile for this project. We've spent about $500,000, and that's towards our land purchase and some of our preliminary engineering, as well as some of our staff time costs. And then we, depending on where we land with our bid estimates once they come in, and some other funding plans that we have, we've allocated we have some projected expenditures in fiscal 25, depending on where we land with fiscal 24. So total project cost is between $6 and $8 million based on our current cost estimates. And again, once we have our bid estimate come back, then we'll be able to narrow those down a little bit.
You have the land all purchased.
We do, yes. We purchased the land in December.
Yes, go ahead.
Are you okay with having questions as we go along?
Sure.
The expenditures that you used for, or the funds that were used to purchase the property, were those?
Transportation funds.
Okay.
Yeah, District Maintenance and Fleet purchased the property. Yeah. So as we're looking over our project timeline, one of the timeline for the project is split over several fiscal years. So we were intending to initiate the project and go out to bid in May of this year. Then we will work on our site work for the entire project. So garage and the site work for the office as well. And then the salt shed would be implemented this year. And then in the following fiscal year, over the next construction season for 24 and 25, we'd be looking at building the office facility and we're starting to move our folks over in that fiscal year as well. So it's split over this construction season and next construction season. So you can see a little bit on the screen what we're looking at for the different phases and where some of the funds would be spent from a little bit different timeline perspective. So this facility is a little bit unique. We currently have about a 10-minute travel time from our existing facility through a downtown area. We're looking at about 6 or 8 stop signs, several traffic lights and signals to the interstate. Our new facility, if we were to be successful with advancing this project, is a 1 to 2 minute travel time from the new location, proposed location to the interstate through 1 stop sign and 1 signal. And would create a significant reduction in travel time for our staff, plus the increased safety.
The old one's been there for 100 years, or it is now.
It has.
It's not efficient. So.
It's not efficient. There's several safety concerns that we've had there. We've had to implement some minor repairs and several significant repairs. It is not an efficient facility. So our new facility, we're planning to implement solar and some heat pumps. And I'd like to introduce Brad McAvoy, our facilities manager, to speak a little bit more to some of the plans that we have in the design. And I'll turn the floor over to him if that's okay with you, Senator.
How many big trucks are coming out of that, are operating out of the old plant?
Todd.
Six, yeah. Six. No.
Yeah, go ahead. And is the land you purchased on the south or north exit ramp of 89?
So Brad McAvoy for the record. It's on the north side.
North, okay.
If you get off the exit, Handy Toyota's right there.
Yeah.
We're about 300 yards out 207 right there.
As far as the old facility, just because it's in transportation where we're usually dealing with government buildings, what happens to the old facility? Is it sold? Where's that money go? What happens with the old facility?
So we have a couple of options. It kind of depends on where we want to go at the time. We will look at those potentials once we have the opportunity to move into a new facility.
Okay, so no decisions yet have been made. Okay.
It's many acres, isn't it? I mean, I've traversed it looking for political signs.
So our new parcel.
The old one. I'm
The
thinking
old
about the old
parcel
one.
is.
Yeah, that's a lot of
it's
land
9
to
acres,
offload, right?
8 or 9 acres.
So there's some potential there. I don't know your zoning plan, but okay. And the size of the new parcel is a couple acres.
The new parcel is 18.
Who's even more? Yes. Oh my gosh, well, please have good signage so I can find my political signs. I have to traverse 18 acres. Okay, great.
Did you just announce your election?
No.
Do you have any more questions before they turn it over?
I can speak briefly about, kind of the overall construction. I know you mentioned kind of the efficiency and the thing. So this garage we're looking at for primary heat source, pellet boiler. And the backup heat would be heat pumps, so it'd be full renewable heat altogether. For the office building, we're looking at roof mounted solar as well as some ground mounted solar. We might be net zero on our electric uses there, depending on, we are planning to add a pretty significant EV infrastructure there. For our fleet, we're also gonna actually put in conduit and have everything in place. If we do eventually go to electric plow trucks, we'll have that infrastructure in place for level 3 charging. We're gonna upsize and put a new dedicated transformer in specifically for EV. It's a good site because we do have 3-phase power right there on 207. So cost savings there is gonna be, not having to go a mile or two with new lines is gonna be beneficial. So we're gonna build everything out for future EVs, the latest efficiencies with, roof insulation, lighting, everything will be meeting or exceeding all the energy codes. So
I don't know if this, go ahead. You had a question?
Yeah, I do, but do you want to finish?
No, you go ahead.
So 2 questions. So will you be able to document the presumably reduced operational costs of that facility with all of the energy stuff that you're putting in versus the old facility?
yeah,
Do
currently.
you have that ability in your just in your financial system?
We do have
I
a
mean, do you get stuff for
portfolio,
electric
we do
bill
have a
and
portfolio
stuff?
energy management system where we're tracking the current usage for electric bills, what would be utilized for heat. So we can track the new facility based against the old facility in that system.
Great.
It's
That'll
tied
be
to,
helpful. Yes,
it's tied to the BGS portfolio manager
great.
for all of our energy costs, so we could track that.
And then the other question, I think I asked this before when we were talking about this facility, but you know that we don't have enough chargers for the public, right? So if there's a way that you can provide public chargers that doesn't get in the way of your vehicles, obviously, I just personally think that would be great.
We would design the chargers closer to the office, not the ones that would be available for our truck charging, with the charge point capability so that anyone would be able to use them.
Oh, great. Okay, perfect.
We're planning to bring in X lots of extra conduit. We're gonna have that dedicated transformer there, so we can expand as well.
Great. Thanks.
I might add that over the years, anytime we put a new, truck garage, we always look for energy efficiency. We burn some wood, some, we always gone that way. And, we're updating most of them now. We haven't got many left that are old now.
I think we currently have 20 garages burning with the newer gasifier outdoor wood boilers. Meet us the latest standards, everything. In areas where we can burn wood, we would love to burn wood at this new one. It's just too big to, they got to do two separate
They
boilers.
come on wood on both sides. Bring it back and burn it. We've been doing this for years, and anytime our cars built, because they do cut a lot of roadside wood. And they bring it back to the garages and then they burn it. So we've been doing that for a long time.
So we seem to, being in the morning committee and transportation, we don't ever seem to have much of a problem with, putting these new facilities in, and they always make sense. This one, I think, is the one that makes the most sense to me, not that the other ones haven't, but just again, as of my opening comments had said about, being so far away from the interstate now where your usage is at. But it just seems to be, there's been a problem as far as keeping this $3.5 million into the budgets on both committees. And can you add a little bit to that, or is it just the way that the funding's going, or what seems to be the holdup? Or it's better best not to say that. It just seems to be a battle where, to me, it makes sense, and I can leave it at that or whatever.
What the house ranking was.
Yeah, or just whatever. I mean, it just seems like this is probably, to me, the one that makes most sense, and it seems to be just a little bit of battle to keep the money in. So we'll leave it at that.
It's not just the efficiencies we're gaining as well. There are safety concerns here now. Like Janet kind of mentioned, right now, if you have a tandem truck in the garage with the wing on, some of the spaces you actually have to turn sideways to get around the truck. So there are concerns there as well.
We saw the video, just so you know.
Yeah, we saw the video.
Yeah, and then first,
Yeah.
Live the video.
We heard you saw the video, so we didn't put it in this presentation.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're welcome. It would be unfortunate not to have this project funded in full. That might impact our ability to secure adequate bidding to advance this project in this fiscal year. So it would be detrimental to the project overall to not be able to bid with secured funding to be able to deliver the project in full over the next 2 construction seasons. So I'm hopeful for support and hopeful for the negotiations to result in positive outcome for the Agency of Transportation and supporting communities that we serve.
Yeah.
So if there's any questions that we can help answer or any conversations that we should continue, we'd welcome that opportunity.
Committee.
I guess there's one, but yeah, no, the project looks wonderful. When you plan this out 4 or 5 years ago, I mean, this doesn't just pop up, right? I mean,
No,
it's been planned.
We look at our facilities in a long-term plan.
Right.
We had originally intended to advance Lunenburg, our facility there. We went out to bid for Lunenburg and didn't receive any bids. Several projects were higher priority and a high priority, equally high priority. And as we were looking at them, we said, okay, well, we can't advance Lunenburg. What's next in line? We didn't get any bids. We need to take the next one and see where we can go with it. So we're putting Lunenburg back in, so that'll be in the 25, 26, and then we'll look at what's next. I can't speak to what's next, because we're not
No,
quite
no,
there
I'm
with
not asking
prioritization, but
but-
that's kind of how we look at, at what's coming, and things crop up, right? So we might have something that happens in the next year that we'll be able to plan in for 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. So we're trying to get our 5-year plan on what are the immediate needs for facility maintenance to maintain a state of good repair across our network, and then what are our larger investments that we need to do for either rebuilds or new builds.
Okay.
Does that,
We actually
Yeah.
had some funding in the T-bill 5 or 6 years ago to put into St. Albans to do upgrades and things. And that's where they really started looking at the bigger picture, like, do we want to invest in this location? It's really not a good location. So that's when we started saying, maybe we put that on pause, and then this parcel came up. The secretary actually noticed it and said, can you look into this? And it fit everything that we needed as far as location and costs and access to 3-phase power. So that's kind of where it advanced up. It didn't really, we looked at St. Albans for years. We didn't fund that much. Actually, I think St. Albans, some of that got cut through some other funds during that fiscal year. But it's been in the pipeline for
Right,
at
I
least
guess,
6 years.
this would normally be funded out of the T-bill, right? So I guess another question I have to follow up, is there any mechanism, because this is, I expect it's one-time money, so like share is maybe the thought. Is there any way to have the T-bill paid back? Or the transportation fund pay back this fund if this does get, if this project is in the capital fund? Because the transportation fund has its own funding
This is
sources.
gonna be out of the cash
it comes out of
Well,
the
even if it's
cash.
out of the cash money,
Well,
but the cash money is general fund.
but, no, not necessarily. They took it over to the corporation of the house. This was for us to spend here, the cash fund.
Okay, but I get, well, so that's a conversation we should have about the cash fund being general fund
Yeah,
or
as we're,
transportation fund or some other fund.
As we're going,
That's
as we're
next,
going down through our spreadsheet, and as we're going down through our spreadsheet and all that, and
Yeah,
we'll have those conversations, and as the cash fund people are coming in next, we'll chat about that. So just to tee it up just one last time, because the cash fund people are coming in. Is this 3.5, is majority of it used for planning and architecture, or some of it for structure?
The bulk of the 3.5, if not all of it, will be actual construction.
Okay. Fair enough.
The hope is to break ground July-ish, or mid-July, get all the site work in, water line, infrastructure, access road, all of the site work, and get the salt shed up before this winter so we can fill it to use this coming snow season. So
Anything else?
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you folks very much. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, no problem. Of course.
It's unfortunate this year, the way it worked out. It should have been. We don't usually have cash, like I said.
Right,
And they give it to, and they took it out of the house, put it in appropriation.
I'd rather
We're
us
gonna spend
save it, honestly.
So what we might have to do, committee, as far as on this, and we'll ask questions. It's great. This is a great line item to be asking
Yeah.
on the next section that we have coming in. So, so you have to make we'll have to make a couple decisions. We'll have to make a couple decisions. Okay, well, they obviously want to do the project, right? So, I mean,
No, it's a good project.
yeah,
I know.
so if they're gonna have a problem of it being cash being in construction, because usually we've been using this cash fund for planning and stuff like that you don't normally bond over 20 years. You just, maybe we'll have to find room within the bonded dollar someplace in here, if you decide that you want to fund this. And we might have to switch out this $3.5 million with someplace else within the bonded dollars.
But
Does that make sense?
We could be disagreeing on some of the items they put into.
Right, exactly.
We're not gonna agree with all their bond money.
No, I understand, but transportation does have a dedicated fund. I mean, and it has really good, revenue sources.
But I think that other than BGS, about any line item you have in here has their own dedicated funds.
I don't.
They have their own budgets from general fund or
But
whatever.
not their own revenue sources.
Well, I don't know that we have revenue out of transportation. right?
Yeah, you do. The gas tax, I mean, to me, the issue is the transportation fund isn't able to, the revenues, well, you know this, the revenues are declining as a proportion of the expenditures.
They're about $1 million because of the EVs, but other than
Right,
that.
well, because, and just people in general are driving less, and the mileage even of gas cars is increasing. So that's been an issue for seriously 15 years or more, is all over the country, that's an issue.
Well, we still got $800 million budget for transportation. I know a lot of it's federal match.
Yeah,
But we don't have that much going to the state on the gas tax.
right,
You know, purchase use, stuff like that. But,
yeah, so at some point, we're gonna have to look, I mean, we have to find other revenue.
Well, so we've got to figure out how we're going to replace the gas tax right now.
Yeah,
We're spending months on that already. It's going to be years before we figure that out.
right, and other places are struggling with that too. I mean,
Nationwide.
right.
Pick us on your way down, as are the other people.
Yes, no problem.
Still alive.
That's fine, no problem. We're good to be live. Nicholas, how are you?
Doing well, Chair. How are you?
Doing great, thank you.
Good to be here. Had the long commute from across the hall. So
Well, hopefully you don't have to use GPS.
Yeah, and actually, if I'm gonna be consistent, the electric vehicle charging stations, those are transportation too, and they're actually still in here.
Well, actually, their infrastructure.
Right, but it's transportation. Just transportation is the biggest other thing that has its own fund, is what I'm getting at. So, so we'll talk more.
It has its own fund,
Yeah, the transportation, fund.
more than anybody else.
I think so, but
Human
you,
services.
I don't know. But does human services have separate revenue? I mean, transportation has a whole separate revenue stream too.
Yeah, but you gotta remember that it's not only all to transportation. That is, we've got quite a few millions and millions of dollars that come out of that fund of the things that they've taken out, the legislature's taken
That are
out.
non-transportation.
Yeah,
Like what?
one of them is, it's like $30 million that comes out and does, I'll think of it in a second.
Are you thinking of the JTOC transfer?
Yeah, the new dog transfer.
It's in
J-Talk?
joint transfer.
Public safety.
If I might, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, please, no, we're having a
And this
discussion.
is not my area of expertise, so I'm
No,
not
we're looking for knowledge.
But I think, yeah, on the order of several tens of millions of dollars annually, there's a large transfer out of the transportation fund to the general fund to fund a variety of different things.
Right, there's not one specific, right, Nicholas?
I believe it goes currently to public safety. I think there's a history of, because the public safety to some degree patrols the roads and there's.
Right, the highways, so it's to pay for that.
But I believe not long ago when the transportation, when the shoe was kind of on the other foot, there was a transfer the other way. So this is sort of a legacy of when the transportation fund had a huge surplus and the general fund was really struggling.
There's like $15 million that goes to something, Nicholas, I can't remember what the heck it was, it was like, they said, what are we doing with that money? I said, what's that going there for? I can't remember what it is, but I'll think of it.
I think we could certainly be happy to follow up with more detail, Mr. Chair. I know Jason and our office works on that pretty closely. And I know that's been part of the administration's posture
Yeah.
on the fees is it seems counterintuitive to be raising fees at the same time that there's this annual transfer. I think it's maybe $20 million, but I don't.
Yes, 21.
From the transportation fund, maybe as an initial step, just rethinking that transfer might help bolster some of those transportation revenues.
Are you thinking about that in the transportation committee? You considering
We're looking at everything that else in our room. We're a lot like.
that? So
what
that
we're
could
doing
be
here.
part of this conversation too. I just like it when funds pay each other back.
That's right.
You know, and you can do that.
Don't count on that.
Well, that's why you write it.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
at a
right.
town level, you put it in an ordinance, you have an actual public agreement with schedules like you would with
There
the
was,
bank.
there was a budget that was presented to the House with a surplus, and they spent every nickel on everything, and the budget's come over to Jane. She's gotta look for all kinds of money now.
Oh, yeah.
Because nobody followed the instructions of where they're supposed to spend the money.
So that's why
They
you
write
gotta
their own budget.
document, do
Yeah,
your
you
legal
could-
stuff.
you could- But it's all subject to change. I mean, you could put anything you want in language, and
Yeah,
it changes. That's what they do.
right.
Like I said, the budget they come over from the House should not be a battle. It's gonna be over here to find the money now because they overspent a lot of, whether the programs are right or wrong, we can discuss that.
Mm.
But,
Yeah, I don't
That's
have
like
the
the
full
fees, they wanna
picture
raise
yet.
the fees, the motor vehicle fees,
Right,
$21 million. They tied it into the transportation budget. That should not be there. If you wanna vote for fees, it should be a separate issue altogether, up or down, but to tie it into the transportation bill, I personally am in favor of the transportation bill like every year, but I'm not in favor of raising fees this year, registration, licenses and everything else. We didn't need it. We started off. Somehow they spent that $21 million. Now we gotta have a fee. Not gotta have them, but they're up for a discussion.
Right, and we didn't have to raise the fees because they weren't doing what it was supposed to do.
Right.
They spent the money, and so now they're looking for new revenue.
And I just have to be one of them with the gonna be enough increases this year with all the other programs that are out there. I didn't think we ought to, I know we haven't raised them in a number of years, I understand that. But the public is saying, you know, you're raising our registration from $74 to $90 or whatever it is. And rightfully so. That wasn't in the forecast 2 months ago. Now it is, so. We have to watch our spending and that's a hard thing.
Definitely.
That's a hard thing for this body to do. Control spending. That's why it has an issue.
because we want to solve problems. But we define that differently.
Yeah, that's right.
That's why we have democracy, so we can talk about it, right?
Adam Grisham will tell you all that stuff. He knows about this, right?
Democracy's overrated.
What do they say? What's that great thing about it's the worst system ever designed except for all of the others? That's true.
That's the church.
Yeah.
Everybody good?
That's it.
He's gonna report a bill, so.
Oh,
might as
okay.
well, go on, so we're still live, so. We got, next, we're gonna be talking about the capital expenditure, cash fund. We are probably looking at a different name for that, and, also to bring some of the newer committee members up to speed on why, how, where, and what the fund is supposed to do, and why we have it, and all of that, so, who would like to lead off?
We're happy to tee it up if you.
Whoever wants to go. Beck, you wanna go?
Do you want me to just go over the language first?
Yeah,
and then you can-
sure. Maybe if we could also, so committee, let me just, I don't wanna just go through this and then, have you guys, say, okay, yeah, we know all that stuff. Are you
I'm fine
familiar with
with
it? Are you
it.
familiar with the cash fund and familiar with the cash fund, understand what it is and
Yeah,
all
we,
that?
I'm good to
we had
hear it
people in
again.
earlier.
Okay, so you're good
Or
with
do
that,
you
so
not
we don't
want
need to go down through that, we can just go through the
We
language.
just want to know where the.
Okay.
But I.
There,
Yeah.
yeah, and there we go.
Okay, great. Becky Wasserman, Legislative Council. So you should have two documents for me. One is, it's language from that was passed in last year's big bill that is current law, which, with what is in statute for the capital expenditure cash fund, as well as a reporting requirement. And then, the other document is the proposed changes to that section of law. that is in the House passed version of the big bill.
This is the first one, right? That's the language you're talking about?
Yes, that's
Okay.
very much. Okay, so what passed last year was, the capital expenditure cash fund. It's in 32 VSA 1001B, and it's a fund that was created to be administered by the Commissioner of Finance and Management in consultation with the state treasurer. And so the current purpose is using general funds to defray the costs of future capital expenditures that would otherwise be paid for using the state's general obligation, bonding authority, and debt service obligations. And then subsection B says what can go into the fund. So it's any appropriations or transfers made by the General Assembly and any interest earned by the fund. Subsection C is how the fund can be used. So first it says expenditure shall only be made from the fund by appropriations from the General Assembly. So there has to be an appropriation to be able to expend the funds. And then plans for use should be submitted as part of the operating budget adjustment or operating budget process. So that is saying that how we use the fund should be coming to the General Assembly from the budget process. And that is the big bill process, not the capital budget process. And then there are 4 things that money can be used for. The first is costs associated with the proposed capital project that occur prior to the construction phase of that project. So that includes feasibility, planning, design, and engineering and architectural costs. Projects that are an anticipated lifespan, have an anticipated lifespan of less than 20 years. The third is costs associated with the early redemption of general obligation bonds. And then 4 other eligible capital projects that receive an appropriation from the General Assembly. So that's more of a catch-all for any eligible capital projects. Subsection D has the balances in the fund, remain carried forward and remain part of the fund. And then subsection E speaks specifically to an early redemption when you use the fund to redeem bonds early. So if an expenditure is made from the fund or the General Assembly appropriates general funds to pay for the early redemption of general obligation bonds, then you have to put an amount that's equal to the reduction in your debt service for any fiscal year back into the fund. So it's kind of putting the money back into the fund that you saved by paying off those bonds early for that fiscal year.
Interesting.
And then section 106.2 was reporting requirement, and I think the committee heard at least Dan on this report.
Well, you can take a.
Oh, they did, okay.
Finance management.
So finance and management in consultation with JFO, the state treasurer, were directed to analyze and make recommendations on a dedicated revenue source or state fiscal capacity to fund this cash fund, and any revenue source or state fiscal capacity identified. They were to do an analysis of the benefits and costs of dedicating that revenue source to the fund in comparison to other identified unfunded state fiscal pressures. They were asked to look at any proposed amendments to this section on the use of the fund, including if the uses of the fund should be prioritized in statute, how to prioritize the use of the fund to emphasize strong financial management in state government, if any allowed use should include internal state debts or deficits, and then finally, if an allowed use should include state assistance for projects to mitigate emergent health and safety needs. And that report came back in January.
So did we get that report? Did I miss it?
And I think your committee did get it, and I think,
Okay.
yeah, I think what
That's
Dan,
ignored.
yeah, I think what Dan just said was like, you had some testimony on it.
Oh, okay,
And
so we have it somewhere maybe on our website.
It should be on your website, if not, it should be on the General Assembly's website
Okay.
where the reports are all located.
Anything crazy in it that really interesting?
I would let them, I wasn't involved in preparing it, so they can, they better able to speak to it. And I can, you can do that now and I can come back and talk about the proposed
I don't
language
wanna
or
mess it up.
whatever.
Keep going, you're doing good.
Okay. Great. So for, there was some proposed language that House institutions looked at and recommended to House appropriations, and it passed in the House passed version of the budget.
Yeah.
And so I'll just go over what those changes are. First is the name of the fund. So the name is proposed to be changed to the Capital Infrastructure Reserve Fund. And in subsection A, under the creation of the fund, it would still be administered by the Commissioner of Finance and Management in consultation with the treasurer, but the purpose is slightly changed. So the purpose is to use general funds to defray the costs of future capital expenditures that would otherwise be authorized in the Capital Construction Act. So the idea here is narrowing what kinds of projects could be paid for out of the fund to projects that would otherwise have come out of the capital bill. And paid for using the state's general obligation bonding and debt service obligations, or paid for as a direct associated cost of a capital project. So that is trying to reference the costs associated with the project, such as planning, design, engineering, and architectural costs. There were no proposed changes to subsection B, what the fund consists of. Subsection C, the use of the funds. There were a number of changes here. So first, this says that the money in the fund can be used for tangible capital investments as described in section 310 of Title 32 with an anticipated lifespan of 20 years or more. That section is dealing with the capital budget. So this is trying to reference what tangible capital investments would be otherwise built into part of the capital budgeting process. And it's adding in that it has to have a lifespan of 20 years or more, which is different from the previous language, which would have allowed sorry.
Yeah, feasibility planning.
Well, it's completely opposite in a way.
The previous language would have allowed projects with an anticipated life, or the current language would have allowed for projects with an anticipated lifespan of less than 20 years. And then 2 is changed to engineering and architectural costs directly associated with the proposed capital project. This language would still allow for costs associated with early redemption of general obligation bonds. And then it sort of strikes out that, any other eligible capital projects. So it's more specific to projects that would have been part of the capital budget process. Subsection D as a recommendation and approval process. This language has the House Institutions Committee reviewing any requests for use of the fund and recommending projects to be paid for from the fund to the House Committee on Appropriations. And also just repeats that language that expenditures shall only be made from the fund by appropriation by the General Assembly. And statute does say right now that the capital bill, the governor's proposed capital budget request goes to the House Institutions Committee, and they're the ones who review it. So this is following that process of what's in statute, of that committee being the first one to review.
Okay, but just,
Yes, please.
like, obviously, Senate, everything could be here somewhere, but maybe not, maybe.
So I can
elsewhere.
pull up the language. So the language for the capital bill has, the capital budget request from the governor going to the General Assembly, but it's the House Institutions Committee that starts with it
Right.
and sends it over. So, so you would get it when it comes over
Right.
from the other body. But there's the reporting requirement to your committee on this as well. So you would receive reports, but would not be the first committee to review the request.
I understand we're not the first committee, it just seems like we would be mentioned.
Well,
as-
by virtue of the fact of reference to General Assembly, it sort of is.
All right, if this is fine with everybody, it's fine. Okay.
Subsection E, there are no changes to the fund balance section, and then subsection F is funding authority. So just to remind you, the current law for the capital bill says that if there are unexpended funds for 2 years or more, the General Assembly is able to reallocate those funds to future fiscal projects. So this language is trying to kind of be similar to what that process is and make sure that the funds aren't just the general funds aren't just sitting in this reserve fund and actually get spent and encumbered. So this has language that says that any entity authorized to make expenditures from the fund shall have not more than 2 years from the legislative session in which the act authorizing the expenditure was enacted to encumber those funds. And then any remaining unencumbered funds shall remain part of the fund. So if you get spending authority in the big bill this year from this fund, you only have 2 years to spend it, or sorry, to encumber it.
The
There,
2 years would start.
2 years from the legislative session in which you were given the authority.
So then for something that's in the second year,
So it
would
would,
that project only have 1 year to spend money?
no, it would still be 2 years from the legislative session, not from the biennium or not.
Okay, so the 2 years would start next year for us. For the budget that we're doing now, if this were enacted, the 2 years clock would start May of 2024,
Right, which I suppose you'd get the information back.
which is actually when it seems a little tight, but just because, well, you know what I'm saying?
I think what they're trying to say in the language, but I hear what you're saying too, Senator Harrison, it's what they're trying to say in the language, they just don't want money sitting around that doesn't have a purpose anymore.
Which is
And
completely
so,
reasonable,
and
yeah.
so what the House Committee has gone down through is they've gone down through and scrubbed some monies that were sitting around for 5 or 6 years. Remember when we were talking about the home down at the
Veterans.
Yeah.
the veterans home? That money was sitting down there, and then they didn't actually take that money, but they repurposed it again. And I think they took a little bit of it. So that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to keep that money from just sitting there and keeping it, if it's been appropriated or bonded, they wanted it in use and not just sitting around.
Totally understand. It's just, when you look at this, as it's written, not more than 2 years from the legislative session in which the act authorizing the expenditure. I mean, we actually vote on it this year, so you could even say 2023, it needs to be spent by 2025, which it can't be in some cases.
Is that the
or
way you were reading it?
It needs to be encumbered.
Right,
Right.
but you have to get a contract to encumber it.
And you need 2 years, but I think that is in line with the other language for the.
We should just check it out how it would be, or maybe you don't have.
I mean, it's the same process for the capital bill that it says unexpended funds for 2 years can be reallocated. So I think it's a policy question if you think 2 years is the right amount of time, but if is following what you do for the other bills.
I would say 2 years from the time the project is planned in the, like, we'll have 2024 and 2025 in the budget that we do, right?
Mhm.
Right.
So something from 2025 to me should be encumbered by 2027 is, I think, a reasonable personally. But since we're going to approve it in 2023, you don't want the 2025 projects to necessarily have to be encumbered by 2025 because you won't have time to go out to bid and get contracts. You might not.
What are they saying, Dan, about the kind of this language? How do you read it?
Well, I think Dan Dickerson, Joint Fiscal, I think Becky has stated the intent pretty well. The one thing I just wanted to note that there's nothing here that precludes an agency from coming to the General Assembly and saying, hey, please extend this spending authority because we haven't had a chance to, if there's a slowdown, let's say there's a pandemic, they could come in and ask for that to be. Yeah.
And there's language that I haven't gotten to yet about that reporting requirement.
Okay.
So that's where you'll get the report and you could decide to extend the spending
Yeah.
authority. And that is essentially what happens in the reallocation process with the capital bill is that they go out and they say, do you have unexpended funds? And then they, get more information on the anticipated timeline and the committee will decide whether or not to pull the funds back or let the project go forward based on the information they receive. So subsection G, the early redemption transfer, this would not change how that funding back to the fund would work if the fund is used to pay down an early redemption of bonds. So if you do that, then the amount equal to the reduction in the debt service in that fiscal year that results would still be transferred back into the fund. And then subsection 8, the report, the Commissioner of Finance and Management is asked every year by November 15th to require that each entity that gets spending authority from the fund to submit a report on the current fund balances of each authorized project with unencumbered funds. And then the report has to include plans for those funds, any projects or contracts the funds are assigned to, and an anticipated timeline for encumbering those funds. And then the Finance and Management would consolidate all those reports and submit those to the House and Senate Institutions Committees by December 15th. So you would have that information prior to building your recommendations in the next session for how to use this fund as well as the capital bill. And this is where if you chose to say we want to extend a department's spending authority for another year, you could do that. Then I just added in some other changes that were related to this that were in the big bill. So section E1001 is amending the statutory section that enables the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee. So as you know, CDAC has to come up with a recommended prudent amount of net state tax supported debt every year. And this new language is directing CDAC to, when they come up with that estimate, not to take into consideration the balance that remains at the end of each fiscal year in the Capital Infrastructure Reserve Fund. So this reserve fund should not be part of CDAC's consideration when trying to come up with the recommended amount of bonding authority each year. And then section E1002 is asking, this is amending 32 VSA 307, which deals with the form of the governor's budget request. So this is asking that when the budget estimates and recommendations come to the General Assembly, what should be included in that is any proposed transfers to the capital and infrastructure reserve fund. So this is, I guess, signaling to the administration to include what their recommended plans are for the fund each year.
Any questions?
I have one, but I don't think it's a fair question for Peg.
Well,
Because it has to do with why something. To me, and maybe I misunderstood it,
I think we ought to probably get Sean Brown in here, maybe the agency of the administration, maybe to go over some of that, but ask the question so that we know.
Yeah, well, I had thought that the original intent of establishing what we now call reserve fund, because we don't ever want to use the word cash, was that it would be used for projects that were not longer than 20 years to avoid debt service and that kind of thing. And that to me made a lot of sense. That you don't need to bond what you don't need to bond if you have reserve funds available. The revision seems to be 180 degrees opposite that, where the use of the funds is limited to those with an anticipated lifespan of 20 years or more, which to me ties up reserve funds. I just don't understand why.
But just remember, as a committee, I mean, if that's what we want to change, we can change.
Yeah, but there must have been a reason. That's all I'm asking. And again, I don't necessarily.
Yeah, I think I can just say that, yes, this language is changing the use of the fund to, I would say, more be an offset for the projects that would otherwise be in the capital bill and not for projects that might not meet the definition of a capital project because it is like less than 20 years, or for some of the, yes. So I think, I can't speak to the why. I think the House committee and perhaps chairmen can come in and speak to their decision on that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gresham, what say you?
Well,
Because I'm sure we have some proposed changes probably here.
you will have. Madam Gresham. Thank you for having me for the second time. This is, it's a treat. It's not a committee I typically sit on. So nice to meet you folks again.
Break up your day.
It's an honor to come in this committee.
I'm led to believe that. And you guys have also met.
Yes, we have. Yep. You've been very helpful.
So I think, in light of the fact that you just read through the bill, I can dispense with the context of it. But what I'll focus on is kind of what came out of the House.
Right.
Kind of what we are looking at. I would note that in the report that we submitted, that substantially Nick wrote and submitted on January 15th, we spoke to you about, that was about creating a funding mechanism. There is no funding mechanism in H494, which is of great disappointment to us. The funding mechanism we created would have been a tool that would have eliminated the need for the Commissioner of Finance and Management to give the report about what the governor recommends to transfer to the fund. It would be in the mechanism. We would be able to see what we transfer, and it would be very transparent. So there is no funding mechanism in there.
So now the way it stands right now, Commissioner, is that for this cash fund to survive, it has to be, we have to base it on that we're gonna have enough money left in the general fund or whatever for it to be put into this fund. There's no dedicated
That's correct.
source. So if we have a downturned year, then our cash fund is depleted.
That is correct. So that's really, I think, the first challenge that we have. There should be a ongoing funding mechanism. I would say that the second issue that we have is, in the governor's proposed budget, the funding was in there. First of all, there was 17.9 million base funding.
Right.
That equaled what the funding mechanism would have had us transfer in there. And there was an additional 62 million of one-time funding. So the base funding was entirely eliminated, and 62 million was cut to 32. So that's really the second thing, and it's, if I could say that the governor had, as always, there were things in the budget he liked, there were things in the budget he didn't like, and probably the single most important did not like was the fact that many of the projects that were reduced were for IIJA state match, not infrastructure projects that are going to be pulling down a fair amount of federal funds. The House Institutions Committee, Evans mentioned that we always have state match. We just do it. We'll worry about it when we get there. But I would just like to say that this is unusually large amount of state match. This is not your average state match, $3-4 million. This is big. So our thought was, let's just get it out of the way. We've got this money. So that's really the second thing. The third
That's
thing,
a 27 million, just to be clear. I mean, that's the match part in it that we're talking about, correct? And that's what leverages $320 million.
and actually you have a page that Nick can walk you through on your website.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
It shows exactly what that is. And
Okay.
I will yield to better mind in a second, but I did want to say one more thing.
No, I was trying to get your report up, but I think it'd be better if I just focus on what you're saying now. So I apologize, but
No, that's all right.
could you go back to the beginning where you were talking about the governor's initial proposal base and the other?
Mhm.
Just say those 3 sentences again, please.
So the governor proposed putting in a little less than $18 million, $17.9 million
17,957
of the base.
on this one right here, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
so
on
it's
that-
here.
that top
I'm
sheet,
sorry.
yeah.
Okay, so we can look at this.
So that was not done. He
Okay.
also proposed transferring $62 million of one time for capital projects and for IIJA state match set aside
And that transfers from general fund to
to the capital
capital fund?
expenditure cash fund.
Okay. Okay.
And the final issue I'd bring up before getting into more details, that frankly mystified us more than anything else. When we presented the budget, and this actually was really my thinking more than anyone else's, being a former legislator. Legislators like to work within their construct, right? So we thought, well, you guys are the institutions committee, right? So we're just going, the appropriations committee is going to, their determination is going to be how much should we put into capital projects? And whatever that number is, we suggested 62 million at one time. Whatever that number is, that's transferred to the capital expenditure cash fund, and it falls in this committee's jurisdiction to figure out what those are and to appropriate them in the capital bill. There's nothing that stops you guys from appropriating in the capital bill. You borrow and you appropriate. You could also just spend one time. The House in their budget, exactly why, I don't know, but what happened was in the House Institutions and Corrections Committee, they determined the projects they wanted, many of which the governor has pointed out, and then they must have pink mailed that to the House Appropriations Committee to put in their bill.
Right.
And that just seems bizarre,
I think.
to transfer into a fund and then to move it back into the big bill one-time section.
I think the speaker probably had both chair of the committee and made a decision.
Pink what?
Pink mail. Do you guys use that term anymore?
Well, I'm new.
That's, the pink envelopes.
That's those notes that get passed around,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So, the Representative Evans sent in this pink mail, here's the projects we want. She sent it to Representative Lamper, and
Alright.
Lamper put it in the.
An internal mail.
I mean, okay,
I was being a little bit.
Right.
yeah.
humorous.
Yeah, okay.
Obviously, that fell flat.
No, no.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I thought it was good.
Anyway, so those are really our thing. I mean, there's no funding mechanism. They reduced the amount.
So can you tell about how the governor had proposed that the funding mechanism would work, just for the committee?
Me to go over that. Yeah, so some senators will recall I was in here with Deputy Commissioner Hardy Merrill, and we kind of walked through a report that largely, I think the thrust of that, report was a 4% transfer mechanism, and that's what the commissioner is referring to, is that we were proposing that annually, as part of the operating budget, 4% of the last completed fiscal year's general fund appropriations be that that number be snapshot, and then from that you subtract current year debt service required amounts, and then there's generally a difference between those, and that amount be automatically transferred into the cash fund. And the rationale behind that is that we have been paying about 4%, this body, the state of Vermont, in general fund debt service anyways, historically. And so we were proposing to lock that in and then via this codified mechanism, kind of automatically sweep money into the fund. And I think, like the commissioner said, the big divergence between the direction that the House went in and our proposal is that, we were charged per the language that Rebecca just read to propose a long-term funding mechanism for this fund, and it appears there is no long-term plan. It's
Right.
an ad hoc basis. So, I submitted this chart. I don't know if it'd be helpful to the committee, maybe just to quickly walk through.
Yeah, please do. Yep.
Highlight the differences. So starting at the top, the fund currently has $25 million in there, and that's from FY '23. That amount was a waterfall appropriation.
Oh, color one.
Yeah,
And
I
that
did my
probably has
best
to do
with
with the center.
colors, but I see they got lost.
Colored ones, yeah.
So there's $25 million in the fund currently. The Gov Rec column, you can see on the left of the two shaded columns, we were proposing $17.9 million. That was part of that 4% transfer mechanism. So the calculation in FY '24 worked out to be about $18 million. And then on top of that, we were proposing $62 million in one-time general funds also to transfer, just because of the unprecedented surplus. And then below that, you can see the governor's proposed capital bill. We were going to spend all the $62 million in one time. And then of the sort of regular cash fund, we were proposing to use about 8.3. So $18 million coming in, 8.3 going out in FY '24. And then in FY '25, continuing down that column, you can see the transfer is actually down. If you do that calculation of the 4% of the last completed fiscal year based on current projections, the transfer in FY '25 would be about 5.8 million. We were proposing to use about 10.8. And if you run through all the math, starting with your $25 million, putting in 18, subtracting out 8.3, and then the calculation for FY '25, you're looking at an ending balance of about $30 million in the fund in FY '25, which, and I think this is really important to underscore. I mean, one of the driving reasons behind why I propose this now is that the state is in, I think Senator Mazza has commented a couple times, we're facing real serious pressure on our capital budgets in future years. School construction, wastewater. I mean, this is a time of kind of unprecedented need. So this is a really good time to be migrating towards a cash funding basis. The state is also struggling with our demographic challenges, trying to keep our ratings in a good spot. All of the rating, or I shouldn't say all, nearly all of the rating metrics that the national rating agencies look at have in their denominator per capita. So as your demographics change, it becomes really important to kind of keep a good lock on your overall amount of general obligation bond issuance. And cash funding is one way to augment your capital projects capacity in a way that doesn't just rely on bond funding. So I think that's why you see that particularly large $30 million balance. We were counting on that per the legislative's the economic forecasts in future years to have kind of a cushion to carry us through the next year. But if you look by contrast, the far right column of this chart shows the House construct. So the one-time $62 million transfer drops down to $32 million. There's sort of no quote unquote regular transfer because they did away with the 4% mechanism. So the funding balance at the end of FY '24 drops to 17.6 million. And then in FY '25, and this is another, I think, question we have, the current capital bill proposes or contemplates $10 million of cash fund use in FY '25. But as of right now, there's no funding mechanism proposed, not even a one-time, not an ongoing one. So presumably that $10 million would also draw from the existing fund balance, leaving the fund at the end of FY '25 with 7.6 million, which is obviously a difference from 30. And I think the concern is that that's maybe indicative of the future of this fund, right? Is it just going to be drawn down over time? I think Chair Emmons has testified that the funds will become available. Given the economic forecast that we're facing, it's just not obvious to us where they're going to come from.
Right.
And from a political standpoint, I think if you're an appropriations committee in a tight year, the sort of ad hoc optional amount that you're sending to another committee might be presumably the first thing to get cut. So that's our concern, that in a time when the state is really facing these unprecedented capital pressures, we're moving to this sort of uncertain year by year approach.
So committee, we probably have some rewriting to do on this, try to figure this out. And if you guys agree with that this is going to be a viable source for capital funding, because the way it works right now, if we keep on going in the way that we're doing, it has no funding mechanism. It has nothing. I mean, before it's all said and done, it's just going to disappear. That money's going to go. It's a lot like what I had in discussions the other day, is that the benefits of having this fund and paying down monies that you're not expending interest on and paying off early is a solid idea. But if we can't be disciplined enough to leave the cash alone, or find a funding mechanism for it, then why do we have the fund? I mean, ultimately, that's where it is. It's a failed experiment after one biennium. That's what it is. So if that's what we believe should be, then we'll just leave this alone. But if we believe in with what the whole premise of it is, then we have some work to do. Yes.
I mean, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to recirculate the initial report we presented. I think one important figure, to the degree it's helpful, is that based on our current projections, which are subject to change, or the figure we're talking about in interest savings over the course of 20 years was $150 million in general fund.
Over how many years?
20 years.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
gonna.
can I ask just one
Yeah,
question,
please,
just
yes,
on that,
yes.
on the interest, so, yeah, I mean, this is a big conversation, right?
It's a big
But
conversation
I
of.
do agree that paying interest on all of your capital is not a good long-term strategy. And when you get an infusion like this, this is an opportunity to transfer to a system where you receive interest. I mean, maybe not completely, but we can just get to that like I want to say like a normal, but when you do long-term planning, usually you want to be on the right side of the interest transfer, right? And get interest, don't just pay it. So I totally agree that all the income that we've got from the federal government is a great opportunity for that. But it's, there's multiple concerns. So in your calculation, did you include interest gains
Coming into
in the first one, and from 24 to 25?
Yeah, they're not
Where you had
obvious
a balance?
here. They're detailed out in the initial report.
Oh,
They're
okay.
actually, compared to the transfer, the 4% funding mechanism, the interest earned is relatively small. That in and of itself is not a huge income source, but it does, I agree, I mean.
Well, it's like not
debt
paying,
portfolio.
not paying 4 and then getting 2 or whatever it is, it's net 6. If you look at it, I think.
So I think what would be important to us is to get back to that report, to study that report enough to see where the benefit of where we're, what the whole, how the program was designed. And know that report, spend some time with it and see how we can adjust if we agree, and see how we can adjust to get this this cash fund as a viable tool moving forward. The sad thing about it for me is if after all of this unprecedented monies that we've had, we come up with a program like this, and then after a short amount of time, all your money's gone, all your ideas are gone, and you're back to trying to, you're back to the way that you did business before, which is what we're trying to avoid. As you've said, Senator Harris. It's, we're trying to get ahead of this curve. We're trying to take advantage of this money, make it last as long as we can. And for me, this cash fund is a way that we can, in perpetuity, make this investment that we got from the federal government last for as long as we want it to last, if we learn to manage it well.
But the money's already been spent now, right?
Well, it has or hasn't, right? So,
But the house is already spent.
well, and maybe we have to claw them back.
But they're gonna, I'm just.
Right. Yeah, as far as, if there was a perfect world right now and the checkbook was shut off, that money is spoken for.
Yeah.
Right,
So they've already used it, now you'd have to get it back from appropriation.
exactly right. So,
That's gonna be a tough one.
Yeah.
I'm not saying. it's
No,
not
it's-
right, But they've already spent it,
right.
then they're gonna say, okay. They
Well-
spent too much money.
Well, and I think, well, here's where it is, just for the committee as well. I think there's a lot of big ideas that have started in the House. A lot of spending started in the House that might not see the light of day in the Senate. And so that's where some of our monies could come back. So if, all these monies that they've talked about spending and it doesn't get taken up on this side, well, then you've got a lot of millions of dollars that they had proposed to spend that doesn't have a home anymore. So where's that gonna go? Well, hopefully it's gonna come back where we want it to be.
The agreement's not.
Exactly right.
That doesn't happen.
Right.
And we're going to do our best to see.
That's right, that's what's gonna take it, great. It's not, how simple, but that's what's gonna boil down to, whether they want to part with it. They feel, as it stands now, they're screaming, they're short naturally because it's overspent. And then the Senate's got priorities, so they got a job on their hands. Once the money's all spent, then you gotta, it's gonna be tough, that's the way it works.
We're just finishing what amounts to more or less 20 years of virtually zero interest rates. On a real basis,
Yeah,
It makes a lot of
almost
sense.
zero interest rates. And it's a very different, this is back to, when I was a kid, bought my first house and paid 7 1/4 of a mortgage. I thought I had just crushed the bank. And, that was a great rate. Well, anyway, our borrowing and our debt service kind of reflects the fact that the interest rates have been low. That's no longer the case. I would also remind the committee that we have a mechanism that we suggested already in place, in that we fund our reserve every year, the stabilization reserve, 5% of the general. First 5% we put into a reserve. Interestingly enough, just like this, we don't actually have to. The requirement in statute is it can be no more than 5%. But we don't actually have to fund it, but every year we do. We top off that reserve, we keep it at 5%. What we're suggesting is the next 4% should go to debt service. We already spend 4% on debt service. It's just that it's all to pay down borrowing. What we're hoping is if we can kind of level off and reduce our borrowing, that 4% will go towards PAYGO. And that's the mechanism, and it's just powerful. It's really powerful. And so anyway, we're here to help. I mean,
Well,
if you have questions, we're going to be taking our case across the hall too.
Just
And
go across the hall and get the money back over here.
Yeah.
they can find it. No, really, they can. Because I think some of it, I don't always say, some of the House initiatives were a bit more pricey than what the Senate has done.
Right.
But the Senate's not done adding what they want to spend either.
You guys,
Yeah, right, yeah.
Just one, when you send the report, if there's any information on that, the reserve with the first 5%, I'd be interested on that. Just
Oh,
if there's an
stabilization
update on that.
yeah, that's it. That's in statute,
And so that we have, that reserve.
that reserve is there.
Good. So
That
what do
money's
we,
just been in there forever, and every
What do we
year
do
we
with it?
keep that reserve at 5%. So when we have say, $100 of appropriations, we put $5 into the reserve.
so is it
So that it stays
increasing
at
every year? All right,
That-
so what can that be used
I think
for?
that's intended to be kind of like a rainy day fund for the state for severe economic downturns.
In fact, it's been
Won't touch
in
that.
my tenure, I don't think we've ever used it.
How much is it? How much was the balance?
Yeah,
About $80 million.
This is not a rainy day occasion.
All right, well, that's a,
I think that's distinct, Senator, from this, which is, as you pointed out, really intentionally to offset debt, which the general fund
And capital,
capitalization,
right.
right, is just sitting there as money. This is really to displace
Right.
liabilities to the state.
Yeah. We can have a whole conversation on emergency reserves, because it's a little different.
Everybody has
With-
that
We're
right.
happy to have that with you.
Okay, good.
I mean, we'd be happy to sit downstairs if you want,
Yeah.
just hang out.
Yeah.
We actually have more than the we have the rainy day fund, which is not the stabilization reserve. That's for a kind of surplus general fund. We've got a 2753 reserve for the 27th pay period and the 50 period we can Medicaid.
Oh, cool. All right. Yeah.
I mean, we've got a human services caseload reserve fund too. About
Oh,
100
interesting.
It's not gonna come to this committee.
Yes.
So earlier I asked about the 20 years, one way or the other. What sort of impact did the change make in this year's capital bill coming over from the House?
I speak first. Well, I think, Senator, our position earlier, when we first proposed the cash fund at the beginning of the session, was that the more it could be used, the better. I mean, I don't think we were particularly pushing for
20 years,
limitations, the 20 years, the 20 years before or after. I mean, from our point of view, any debt displaced by pre-funded cash
Debt is debt.
is a good thing. And I think the House, your House counterparts had some questions about the definitions, and I believe this language came from them, so I couldn't really say it.
Well, debt is debt, but if it lasts longer, it costs you more money, doesn't it?
Agreed.
I mean, to me, there's a difference between buying a pair of shoes and putting it on a credit card or paying cash versus buying a car. I mean, you're talking about a couple of different things. The car's probably gonna last maybe a little bit longer than your shoes.
Have you ever thought they didn't have a choice to make that decision?
The thought crossed my mind, so I don't know.
Well, that's where it's all started.
Okay, I get it.
Other people made that decision.
Yes,
So-
okay.
And what is, thank you. No, this, are we talking about this or not? Or
I could
who is this from? I would like to.
that works. So this is really a technical amendment, or it's not amendment, technical commentary. This is part of the technical memo the administration sends over to their colleagues across the hall in appropriations. This is just pointing out the fact that as part of our original proposal, we were proposing that the cash fund uses be both authorized and appropriated in the capital bill. As the commissioner mentioned, we just feel like it's the jurisdiction of the institutions committees to do that. As Rebecca outlined, the House has moved, the authorizations are still in the capital bill, but the actual appropriations are in the appropriations bill. And that actually presents a couple of sort of technical back-end difficulties for our financial operations division, which set up, without going deeply into the weeds, sort of different accounting structures for things that are in the capital bill versus one-time appropriations in the appropriations bills, and it has to do with what funds can carry forward. So that page just really outlines those concerns and highlights the fact that the administration feels, again, strongly that these should be part of the capital bill and not the appropriations bill.
So this was the administration's
So we write a letter.
input to the House.
Right, we write a letter to the
Conversation.
Senate Appropriations Committee, we write
Okay.
a policy letter, and we write a technical letter. This is technical letter. Technical letter is really for kind of the weedy stuff.
Okay.
Typically, joint fiscal deals with our operations folks. Sometimes it's typos, sometimes it's just basic stuff that reflect the fact that human beings make up the budget and occasionally they make errors. So technical means not policy related, just, yeah, it doesn't rise to the level of the governor getting involved or the speaker or whatever, but
But
it's,
this is policy.
no, that's technical.
Seriously.
Yeah, it's pretty technical.
We just wanted to bring it to this committee's attention since it's pertinent to the discussion and
Okay,
to what y'all may choose to do.
so and it's this year before the House did what they did or after the House?
Responding to
the House.
Okay, so this is recent.
It's in H 494, which is what we're responding to.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
It's been fun.
Commissioner, I'll be chatting with you for a little bit. I'm gonna need a little help from a couple things in my brain. So
Watch out.
I'll,
There's a lot of that, right?
You know how to find me.
thank you very much. Is that what we got for today?